I'd taken the longer way home because I wanted the quiet. My shift at the museum had trained me, the kind of slow, echoing day where every footstep sounded like it belonged to someone else. The highway cut through rural land with nothing but dark trees and the faint silver of drainage ditches glinting in my headlights. I rolled the windows down just enough to smell wet grass and cold air, trying to keep myself alert. It felt routine, almost peaceful, like this drive was part of some nightly ritual that kept me steady. I noticed a car behind me maybe 10 minutes in. Just a pair of steady headlights, not too close, not too far. I barely registered it at first. Night driving always came with company, even if you didn't see much of it. I turned on some low radio static for background noise and kept going. The first turn was normal. I exited early by mistake, realized it too late, and figured I'd just loop around through a neighborhood I barely knew. The car followed. No big deal, I told myself. Probably just someone else using the same shortcut. I made a second turn, then a third, both unnecessary, both forcing me deeper into streets that were dark and unfamiliar. The car's headlights slid around each corner right after me, smooth and patient. My chest tightened just a little. To test it, I started making blatantly random choices. Left, then immediate right. A slow crawl around a cul-de-sac. A U-turn so sharp my tires chirped. Every move I made, they copied in perfect rhythm, like a second shadow glued to my taillights. I muttered to myself that it was coincidence, that paranoid thinking made patterns where none existed. But that didn't change the way my palms started sweating on the steering wheel. I pulled over suddenly, hazard lights blinking, the kind of stop that made no sense. The car slowed and came to rest behind me. They didn't pass. They just sat there, engine idling, no interior light, no silhouette I could make out. The quiet pressed in so hard I could hear my own breathing, short and shallow. After about a minute, my phone vibrated in the cup holder. Unknown number. Why did you stop? The screen's glow felt blinding in the dark car. My stomach dropped, like I'd missed a step on the stairs. I looked in the rear view again. Still motionless. Still watching. I didn't reply. I locked the doors, even though they were already locked, and forced my hands to stop trembling. Another buzz. Unknown number. You weren't supposed to stop yet. I started driving again, heart banging so hard I could feel it in my throat. The car rolled after me immediately, like it had been waiting for permission. I told myself this was a prank or some mix-up. Maybe someone thought I was someone else. But the certainty in the text made my skin crawl. It didn't sound curious. It sounded disappointed. I changed directions again, faster now, less careful. They stayed right behind me, closer than before, their headlights washing over my mirrors. The radio fuzzed, the air felt thick. Every rational part of me tried to explain it, tried to believe this was harmless stupidity. But another message arrived. Unknown number, you keep trying to lose me. That's not how tonight goes. My vision blurred with the force of my heartbeat. I spotted a gas station miles ahead, the only bright island in the blackness, and steered toward it, hoping for people, cameras, anything. The car closed the distance, so near I could see the outline of its grille, a dark, dented sedan with no front plate. As I turned into the station, they followed, blocking the exit behind me. The fluorescent lights revealed a man in the driver's seat, eyes fixed, mouth slack in a bored half smile. He raised his phone slightly, as if to show me. I saw my own car on his screen, live, the feed circling me like a hunting scope. He got out slowly, phone still in hand, and I flinched away, fumbling for my bag, for anything. But before he could speak, red and blue lights ripped through the night. A patrol car screeched in, spotlights snapping onto him, barking commands. He froze, Hands up, the phone clattering onto the pavement. An officer rushed to my window, voice firm but steady, asking if I was all right. I nodded dumbly, trying to process the way relief and horror tangled in my chest. They pulled the man aside, cuffed him, and one of the officers picked up the dropped phone. I caught a glimpse of the screen as he logged it for evidence. My name was typed at the top, a thread of addresses, routes, photos taken from a distance over several nights. He hadn't found me by accident. He'd been rehearsing this. The police told me later he'd been arrested before for stalking commuters and live-streaming their reactions to a private group. He picked me weeks ago, tracked my schedule, memorized my routes. Tonight was just when he decided to see how far he could push it. I drove home with an escort and slept with every light on. By morning, the shock had dulled into a quiet, exhausted certainty. It was over. He was in custody. My number changed, my routes changed, my life shifted around a new invisible scar. But the night itself was finished, sealed, and concluded, the way a door slammed shut after a long, echoing hallway. And for the first time in hours, when my phone buzzed, it was silent again. I had always liked the night drive after visiting my sister's place, the slow unwinding of tension as the road unspooled beneath the tires and the city thinned into farms and empty stretches of asphalt. That evening felt especially calm. The moon hung low, pale and soft, and my car hummed steadily as stale heat drifted through the vents. I kept the radio low, some old talk show murmuring in the background, and let my thoughts scatter the way they always did when there was nothing but headlights and darkness ahead. The first time I noticed the car behind me, it was only because its beams flared too bright against my rearview mirror. I adjusted the angle, irritation prickling, and focused on the speedometer. I was already right at the limit, maybe even a touch over, but the lights pressed closer, white and insistent, flashing once, then again. I frowned and moved slightly right, giving them room to pass. They didn't. Instead, the vehicle slipped into the lane beside me, gliding up until it matched my speed seamlessly. I glanced over. The driver sat rigid, face pale in the spill of headlights, eyes fixed forward as if the road were all that existed. His right hand held a phone upright, lens angled toward me. He didn't look at it. He didn't look at me. He just drove, recording, unblinking. A race of unease skittered through me. I told myself it was some oblivious idiot on a video call, or someone filming the scenery for no good reason. But the way the phone tracked my car unsettled my breath. When I sped up, he sped up. When I eased down, he slowed too, keeping the same exact distance, like we were tethered. I rolled my window down and gestured for him to go ahead. The air sliced cold against my cheek, carrying the damp scent of soil and exhaust. He didn't react. His gaze never shifted. A bright flare burst from his headlights. One sharp flash, then another. The rhythm felt deliberate, as if he were signaling something I couldn't understand. My stomach knotted. I forced a careful laugh and told myself to stay calm. Overreacting would just make this worse. But my fingers gripped the steering wheel too tight, knuckles aching. I slowed more, letting my car dip below the limit, hoping he'd finally take the hint and glide past. He didn't. He hummed there beside me, immaculate control, the slight hum of his engine breathing through the night. Then his phone tilted just enough for me to see its screen. It wasn't a call screen or a camera app like I'd assumed. It was a live feed of my face caught in my side mirror, grainy but indisputably me. A little red dot blinked in the corner. Recording. Terror crept up my spine, slow and cold, like something crawling beneath my skin. I rationalized again, clung to logic, telling myself maybe this was targeted advertising, maybe he thought I'd scraped him or something absurd. But the longer he stayed, the more that dread swelled, heavy and undeniable. The highway curved lightly, the fields becoming wider, lonelier. No other cars passed. Just the two of us, trapped in parallel motion. He lifted the phone slightly higher. On the screen, a message popped up over my own terrified reflection. Wave. My throat closed so tight I could barely swallow. I stared straight ahead, refusing. My heart slammed so loudly I felt it against my ribs, a frantic, suffocating drumbeat. He pressed something on his screen. The headlights flared again, aggressive now, and his car drifted a few inches closer. The sides nearly kissed. I swerved away instinctively, tires screeching faintly. Another message appeared. Don't make this hard. I jerked my wheel and sped forward, abandoning any pretense of calm. My engine roared, the road blurring. He matched me instantly, smooth as a predator pacing its prey. Sweat slid down my temple, cold despite the heater. I spotted a service exit sign ahead. My mind clung to it like salvation. I shot my car down the ramp, hoping the sudden change would break whatever twisted game this was. The second I committed to the turn, his vehicle peeled after me. The exit ended in a lonely rest stop, half-lit and eerily quiet. I braked hard and skidded into a space near the vending machines, hands shaking. He rolled in beside me and stopped with perfect symmetry. We sat there in oppressive silence. He finally turned his head, slow and deliberate, and I saw the hunger behind his eyes. Not rage. Not madness. Calculation. He tapped his phone screen and held it up to his window so I could see. A running counter ticked upward beneath my image. Views. Dozens. Then hundreds. Smile, he mouthed through the glass. Panic shattered whatever courage I had left. I threw my car into reverse and slammed the gas, backing out crookedly before spinning toward the road again. My tires protested as I bolted back onto the ramp. Behind me, his engine surged. He was hurting me. The realization struck sharp and cold. He wanted the chase. He wanted the panic. Every move I made fueled whatever spectacle he was broadcasting. A flash of red and blue sliced the darkness ahead. A patrol car thundered down the road, lights pulsing against the fields, siren tearing through the night. I veered toward it desperately, laying on the horn, waving an arm wildly out the window. The driver beside me hesitated for the first time. His rigid confidence cracked. The patrol cut between us aggressively, forcing him to pull over. I kept driving another 100 yards before jerking to a stop, chest heaving, vision trembling. The officer approached my car first, voice urgent, grounding. My words came out disjointed and breathless as I explained, pointing shakily behind me where the other car sat pinned under authority and floodlights. They arrested him there. No struggle. No protest. Just a hollow grin as they dragged him away, still clutching the phone like a prized trophy. Later, at the station, they let me see part of the footage he'd been streaming. My own face, fear widening my eyes, the road vibrating beneath me, comments scrolling along the side from strangers hungry for my terror. He wasn't just harassing drivers. He was monetizing fear, creating live encounters. I had been content. They shut his stream down, seized his accounts, locked him away. The officer assured me it was over, that he wouldn't be driving beside anyone again. When I finally made it home, I parked in total silence, every muscle still tense, and shut off the ignition. The night swallowed the road beyond my driveway, dark and indifferent. I sat there a long time, listening to the ticking of cooling metal, grateful the headlights beside mine were gone, knowing with certain clarity that the horror had ended and that I had escaped it. I had driven that stretch 100 times before, late evenings after helping my dad at his shop, the kind of routine trip where muscle memory did most of the work. The road cut through aging strip malls and shuttered diners, places that remembered brighter years, and by 10 o'clock almost everything was dark. I liked that hour, the soft murmur of tires on asphalt, the faint mechanical purr beneath the hood, the sense of being suspended between day and sleep. It was quiet enough that I noticed every small detail. The flicker of a broken street lamp. The smell of warm rubber when I stopped too long. The low thump of bass from some invisible car a block away. When the light turned red at the main intersection, I rolled to a stop without thinking much of it, fingers drumming lazily on the steering wheel. That was when the knocking started. At first, I thought it was just someone tapping the hood or the trunk. Then the sound came again, sharper, against my driver's side window. I turned and saw a man standing close enough that his breath fogged the glass. He was middle-aged, face tight with urgent seriousness, eyes flicking downward toward the back of my car. "Your tire's flat," he said, mouthing the words through the closed window before tapping the rear of the vehicle again. "Back left. You're riding on the rim." My gaze snapped to the side mirror, trying to angle it just right, but all I saw was shadow and dim pavement. Panic pricked at me. A flat tire at night wasn't something I wanted to deal with, especially right there, but his expression carried enough tension that it made me uneasy in a different way. Concerned, almost rehearsed. I cracked the window just enough to hear him clearly. "Are you sure?" I asked, already picturing the long wait for roadside assistance. He nodded sharply. "Yeah. You've been wobbling down the road. You don't want to keep driving like that." Something about the phrasing felt off, but I brushed it aside, telling myself this was just another stranger trying to help. I grabbed my keys and stepped out slowly, the cold night air curling around my legs as I moved toward the back of the car. The pavement felt uneven under my shoes. I crouched, examining the tire. It looked fine. Firm. Whole. And that's when I heard it. The faint, metallic click of my passenger door handle. I froze. Before I could even turn fully, I saw movement in the corner of my vision, another figure emerging quietly from behind my trunk, walking with deliberate calm toward the opposite side of the car. His hand stayed on the door, tugging once, then again, each attempt more impatient. A rush of dread flooded me so fast my ears buzzed. The man who'd flagged me down stepped back, creating space like he was allowing the other one to work. "You're good, just check in," he called casually, his tone shifting, casual now, almost bored. I didn't bother responding. Instinct yanked me into motion. I sprinted around the rear of the car and dove back into the driver's seat, slammed the door shut with shaking hands, and twisted the key with frantic urgency. The engine roared to life. I risked a glance. Both men had already retreated to their own vehicle, an older sedan I hadn't noticed behind me before, and now sat inside, parked directly at an angle, headlights trained squarely on my face like interrogation lamps. They didn't move. They just watched. The red light still burned above me. A terrible realization settled in. They'd orchestrated it perfectly. The false emergency. The distraction. The quiet approach on the other side. If my doors hadn't been locked automatically, they'd have been inside. The light turned green. I stomped the gas and didn't look back. For a moment, the engine behind me remained still, and hope flickered weakly. Then their headlights surged forward, matching my acceleration with sharp intent. They weren't done. They had followed me. My mind scrambled for logic. Maybe it had been a misunderstanding. Maybe they just wanted to scare me. But my pulse told a different story, a cold certainty that this wasn't coincidence, it was practiced. They stayed behind me, not swerving, not honking, just close enough that I couldn't forget they were there. I veered off onto a main road leading toward the highway exit, passing closed storefronts and empty bus stops. The silence felt heavier now, like the air itself had grown thick. I considered pulling into a well-lit area, some open business, but the mere thought of stopping made my throat tighten painfully. I reached for my phone and dialed emergency services, keeping one eye on the glowing rear view. The operator's calm voice guided me through what to do, asked for my location, told me to keep driving and avoid stopping. The sedan didn't break formation. It crept closer, headlights burning brighter, almost aggressive. Occasionally, it swerved slightly, enough to suggest purpose rather than random pacing. Minutes stretched into something elastic and suffocating. Then, faint but unmistakable, sirens began to wail behind us. Red and blue strobed across the road, washing the asphalt and fields in violent color. The lights closed in quickly, slicing between me and the pursuing car with commanding authority. The sedan jerked sideways, its brake lights snapping to life as it was forced to pull over. I didn't slow until instructed to. Eventually, I eased to the shoulder, breath shuddering out of my body in uneven waves. The officer approached gently, his voice low, reassuring, explaining they had received multiple complaints tonight of similar tactics, staged road concerns to lure drivers from their vehicles. They arrested both men on the spot. I watched from a distance as they were cuffed and led away, their faces blank, almost annoyed, as if caught mid-routine rather than mid-crime. The realization of what could have happened hit me with sharp clarity. If I hesitated even a second longer, if the doors hadn't locked, if I'd stayed outside just a breath more. I drove home with a police escort, streetlights blurring past like soft ghosts. By the time I reached my driveway, the night had settled into stillness again, but the echo of their headlights stayed burned behind my eyes. That moment at the red light had been ordinary. Forgettable. But the horror that bled out from it had teeth, and it had been real. And it ended because I ran. I had finished closing up the bookstore later than usual, the kind of late that made every aisle feel hollow and every creak of the floorboards echo like footsteps. By the time I pulled onto the road, the town had thinned into quiet darkness, storefronts asleep behind metal grates, the usual glow of traffic replaced by isolated pools of streetlight. I liked the solitude of that drive home. It gave me time to let the day drain out of my shoulders, the tension melting as the road stretched ahead like a blank ribbon. A few blocks from the shop, I noticed a man standing near the curb, one hand half raised, the other stuffed into his jacket pocket. He didn't look threatening. Early 30s maybe, clean haircut, casual clothes, the tired face of someone who'd missed the last bus. I hesitated only a second before pulling over. It felt like the decent thing to do, and the night had that strange stillness that made everyone seem more human. "Thanks, seriously," he said as he climbed in, voice warm and grateful. He gave an address a few neighborhoods over, nothing far out of my way. I introduced myself. He did the same. His name was Marcus. He talked easily, about work, about how public transit near his place had been cut back. His laugh came light, unforced. Normal. At first, everything stayed that way. 5 minutes into the drive, he glanced at the road ahead and said casually, "Hey, you mind taking this next right instead? It'll be faster, less traffic." It wasn't on my usual route, but the suggestion seemed reasonable. I shrugged and turned. The terrain changed subtly, older houses, darker yards, fewer porch lights left on. He kept talking, tone relaxed, as if nothing had shifted. A minute passed. Then another suggestion. "Actually, if you take the left up here, it skips the weird stop sign cluster." I raised an eyebrow, but followed it anyway. I had no real reason not to. When I questioned it lightly, he chuckled. "Trust me, I know this area like the back of my hand." Still, Something in his laugh felt slightly hollow, like a sound effect played a second too late. The streets grew more unfamiliar. The houses thinned, replaced by wide lots and stretches of chain-link fencing. My sense of direction tugged nervously at the back of my mind. This didn't feel like a shortcut anymore. "Are you sure this is the right way?" I asked, trying to keep my voice light. He looked out the window, amused. "You're way overthinking it. You said you didn't mind detours, right?" I hadn't said that. The road narrowed, and the pavement became rougher, tires crunching lightly over gravel. My headlights revealed less greenery and more metal abandoned signs, rusted trailers, looming silhouettes that no longer resembled homes. I smelled oil and damp concrete through the vents. "Marcus," I said slowly, "where exactly are we going?" He waved a hand dismissively, still smiling. "Relax. People always freak out when the scenery changes." The air in the car thickened. His tone hadn't sharpened, but the reassurance somehow felt rehearsed, mechanical. I slowed instinctively. He didn't comment on that, just stared forward, hands folded loosely in his lap. We passed under the last functioning streetlight and dipped into something darker, an industrial stretch I didn't remember ever driving through, even in daylight. Warehouses loomed like sleeping giants, windows either boarded or black. No signs. No traffic. No glow except my own headlights carving narrow tunnels through dust. Every turn he suggested led further into emptiness. "You can just drop me off up ahead," he said casually, pointing into pure darkness. "There's nothing out here," I muttered. He laughed, softer now. "Looks like it, doesn't it?" Unease crawled across my skin. I gripped the steering wheel harder, tried rationalizing again. Maybe he worked night shifts. Maybe he lived in some factory apartment I didn't know about. But the further we went, the more my instinct screamed that this wasn't accidental. The scenery sharpened into eerie detail, forgotten loading docks, stacks of rusted barrels, chain gates half swung open like jaws. My breath felt shallow. Cold air seeped through invisible cracks. "Marcus," I said, more firmly. "I'm not comfortable being out here. I'm turning around." He finally looked at me then. The friendliness didn't vanish entirely, but his eyes held something deeper, a quiet weight behind the smile. "You already came this far," he murmured. The words settled like damp fog in my chest. I signaled anyway and began to angle the car into a three-point turn. The tires rolled, hesitant. As the headlights swept across the surrounding darkness, I saw shapes moving near one of the abandoned buildings, shadows shifting where there should have been stillness. I swallowed hard. "You don't need to do that," Marcus added, voice calm. "My friends are just waiting up there." My heart thundered. "Friends?" His smile widened just enough to no longer seem human. "It's safer if you stop." I slammed my foot down. The engine roared, my car jerking forward with sudden defiance. Gravel sprayed. Marcus reacted too late, grabbing for the dashboard as the world lurched. He shouted something, words jagged and sharp, but I didn't listen. I focused on escape, on the thin thread of road behind me. He clawed for the handle. I'd already locked the doors. "Hey," he snapped, pounding once. "Don't get stupid." Streetlights reappeared faintly in the distance, fragile and beautiful like stars. I pushed harder, ignoring the shuddering pleas, the thumps against the glass, the shifting silhouette outside where movement had multiplied. Marcus stopped struggling. He just stared, fury chilled into something disappointed. When I finally skidded back into familiar territory and pulled into the crowded glow of a late-night grocery store, I wrenched open the door and shoved him out. He stumbled but recovered quickly, fixing me with a look that burned low and patient. You really could have made this easier, he said quietly. I reversed immediately and sped off, watching him shrink in the mirror. I reported it. I described everything. The police later confirmed that the industrial lot I'd been led toward was tied to multiple disappearances, lured drivers, staged friendliness, never seen again. Marcus was never found. And the next time I passed that stretch at night, I made sure no one stood waiting at the curb, smiling like they already knew where I was going. I had taken the old back road because my phone battery was dying and the map kept glitching, insisting the main highway was closed for construction. Normally I avoided that stretch after dark, but the night felt ordinary enough, cool air slipping in through the slightly cracked window, the faint scent of pine and damp earth rising from the shoulders of the road. My headlights carved through a tunnel of black, and the comforting hum of the engine steadied my nerves as I told myself this was just another quiet drive home. The road narrowed after the last cluster of houses, the asphalt roughened, and small stones clicked softly against the underside of my car. The trees leaned closer, their branches forming a loose canopy that swallowed what little moonlight there was. My own reflection hovered faintly on the windshield, pale and tired, eyes half-lidded from the long day. That was when I noticed the hazard lights blinking ahead. Orange pulses flickered rhythmically against the darkness, steady and urgent. A car, I assumed. Someone stranded. I eased off the gas, squinting, trying to make out the outline through the uneven glow. A figure moved in the road, arms raised, waving frantically. My first instinct was concern. The second, hesitation. I slowed further, rolling closer. The windshield caught more detail. It wasn't a car. There were no taillights. No metal shape. Just the man, standing dead center in the lane, his hands slicing the air in desperate arcs. He looked normal enough, jacket, jeans, slightly hunched posture like someone exhausted by stress. His face was pale, eyes wide, mouth moving as if calling out something I couldn't hear over the engine. I cracked my window an inch. "Are you okay?" I called. He stepped forward, relief flashing across his features. "Thank God you stopped," he said, breathless. "My car died back there and my phone's dead. I just need a ride, please." I glanced behind him automatically, scanning the tree line and the black stretch of road beyond. There was nothing. No car lights. No silhouette of metal. Only brush and shadow. Unease coiled low and slow in my stomach. "Where is it?" I asked. He gestured vaguely over his shoulder, toward thick trees that pressed in like a wall. "Just around the bend," he said quickly. It rolled further than I thought. His explanation felt thin, but I told myself not to overthink it. Plenty of people broke down on empty roads. Plenty looked frightened. Still, as I shifted my weight forward and brushed the brake, something tightened in my chest. Then movement caught my eye. On the opposite side of the road, where the forest veiled itself in tangled darkness, another shape peeled away from the trees. Taller. Slower. Almost careful. A silhouette. My pulse stuttered. The man noticed my hesitation and smiled reassuringly, but the gesture felt oddly rehearsed, as if he'd practiced it on strangers before. "I swear I'm not trying to freak you out," he said, lowering his arms. "Just need a lift to the next exit." The second figure edged closer, boots crunching faintly on unseen gravel, though the man didn't acknowledge him. I didn't roll the window down any further. "Why didn't you stay with the car?" I asked. He laughed weakly. "Didn't want to get clipped out here." Neither did I. The taller silhouette took another step closer to the road. I could almost feel his presence through the glass, patient, watchful. The first man's eyes shifted ever so slightly toward him, like a silent cue shared between them. The dread I'd been arguing with finally snapped free of logic. "I can't stop here," I said, voice tight. "Wait, don't just leave me," he insisted, stepping forward, hand rising as if to touch my hood. The shadow on the other side picked up speed. Adrenaline surged. I slammed my foot onto the pedal. The tires barked sharply and the car lurched forward, surging past them. The man dodged back just in time, his expression twisting from polite desperation into something colder, annoyed, exposed. In my rearview mirror, they didn't yell, didn't chase. They only stood there watching me retreat, like fishermen disappointed their line had snapped. My breathing came out shallow and sharp. I drove hard for several minutes, refusing to slow, vision scanning every edge of road, every suggestion of movement. The quiet felt too heavy, as if the forest itself were holding its breath. A mile or two later, headlights appeared behind me. My throat went dry. The car gained steadily, closing the distance until I could see its outline, an older sedan, paint too dark to distinguish. Its high beams flared briefly, then dimmed. It stayed behind me, close enough to feel intentional. The realization struck cold and merciless. The man wasn't alone. They hadn't expected me to run. The car mirrored my speed exactly, hovering scarcely a few car lengths back. Fear settled deep into my limbs, heavy but sharp. I switched lanes. They followed. I slowed. They slowed. Every instinct screamed. I spotted a narrow access road up ahead, one I vaguely recognized from daytime drives. Without thinking, I swerved hard onto it. The road twisted sharply between trees and brush. For a second, the pursuing car overshot before correcting and roaring after me. The engine behind me crawled louder. The darkness thickened like syrup. My headlights skimmed over piles and debris as I pushed the car past comfort. The pursuing headlights bounced violently but refused to fade. Then, unexpectedly, police sirens burst through the night. Red and blue washed the road as another set of headlights barreled toward the sedan behind me. The pursuing car slammed its brakes and veered violently toward the shoulder. I barely registered their surrender as the patrol swooped between us, forcing them to stop. I slowed shakily, pulling to the side under instruction, heart still hammering ferociously. An officer ran to my window. "You all right?" he asked urgently. I nodded, barely able to speak, eyes glued to the scene unfolding behind me where both men were being pulled from the vehicle and restrained. The man who'd waved me down stood with his head tilted back slightly, expression flat now, drained of charm. Later, I learned that stretch of road had been flagged before. They set up timed lures, one man feigning distress, the other waiting to block or corner approaching drivers. Robbery, assault, worse. Some hadn't escaped fast enough to tell the story. I made it home just before midnight, locked my door, and sat on the edge of my bed in the near dark, the ghost of blinking hazard lights still burning in my mind. The back road remained quiet after that. But every time I passed a flicker of amber light in the distance, my hands tightened on the wheel, and I always remembered the man standing alone in the middle of the road. I had stopped at that gas station out of habit more than need, the same tired impulse that pulled me there whenever a late shift left my hands smelling like paper and dust. The fluorescent canopy buzzed overhead, washing my car in cold white light that made the night beyond it look thicker, almost syrup dark. The air carried the faint tang of fuel and hot rubber, and somewhere a loose sign clacked softly in the breeze like an anxious metronome. I filled the tank slowly, listening to the steady hollow glug, letting my thoughts drift. It had been an uneventful evening, just inventory sheets and the stale scent of old books, the kind of ordinary that settled into your bones and made silence feel earned. I was midway through replacing the nozzle when a man's voice cut gently through the ambient hum. "Long way home?" He stood a few feet away near the entrance, hands tucked casually in the pockets of a windbreaker. His posture was relaxed, friendly even, with the faint practiced smile of someone who spoke to strangers often. I barely glanced at him at first. "Not too bad," I replied. "Just heading back across town." He nodded, eyes tracing the line of my car, lingering too long on the license plate before lifting back to my face. "That highway's rough this late," he said lightly. "Where are you headed exactly?" The question felt just intrusive enough to give me pause, but I brushed the instinct aside. People made conversation. That was all. "North side, near the river," I said vaguely, capping the tank and stepping back. "Ah," he murmured. "Quiet out there." His eyes sharpened slightly, then softened again, as if smoothing over something unspoken. He wished me a safe drive with the same courteous tone and returned to a black sedan idling near the edge of the lot. I thought nothing of it until I was 2 miles down the road. My mirror showed the familiar stretch of night highway, empty and dim, except for a pair of pale headlights gliding out behind me. The black sedan emerged onto the road, settling at a near-perfect distance from my bumper, neither aggressive nor relaxed. Just present. A flicker of recognition stirred. I told myself it was coincidence. He had to go somewhere too. I adjusted my speed slightly, easing up, then increasing it again, gauging whether the car would move differently. It matched me effortlessly, a quiet echo on the asphalt. The road curved gently, distant storefront lights thinning until only scattered pools of amber dotted the horizon. I signaled and took a random exit, one that dipped into a quiet side route I rarely used. He followed. My knuckles tightened around the steering wheel. I told myself not to assume the worst, not to spiral into paranoia. But when I slowed under the speed limit, his car slowed too. When I accelerated, so did he. No sign of turning off. No hesitation. I veered onto another exit, then another, looping through unfamiliar industrial roads, past silent warehouses that loomed like forgotten giants. The sedan mirrored every turn with patient precision, its headlights never wavering, its presence constant as breath. A chill crept under my collar, sliding down my spine. The windows felt thinner. The darkness felt closer. At a stoplight, I glanced back fully for the first time. The man was unmistakable now, face faintly illuminated by the dashboard glow, eyes unblinking, watching the back of my car with almost analytical focus. When our eyes met through layers of tinted glass and distance, his expression did not change. He didn't wave. He didn't acknowledge me. He just stared forward again, steady as a machine. I laughed quietly to myself, forced and brittle, trying to rationalize it. Maybe he recognized me. Maybe this was misinterpreted anxiety. Maybe he just lived somewhere near my route. But logic began to rot the further he followed. I turned sharply down a narrow access road, one meant only for delivery trucks and maintenance workers. My headlights skimmed cracked pavement and overgrown weeds. His lights followed instantly, reflecting off rusted fences and sagging gates. Every wrong turn I made, he traced perfectly. Finally, breath shallow, I pulled into a brightly lit grocery store parking lot, empty save for a few scattered cars. I eased to a stop and left the engine running, chest tight, pulse hammering against my ribs. The sedan rolled in behind me and parked 3 spaces away. The engine continued idling, a low vibration in the night. He stepped out slowly. The air seemed to hold its breath as his shoes scuffed against asphalt. He approached my vehicle without urgency, raising one hand casually as if greeting an old friend. "Funny running into you again," he said pleasantly, voice smooth. My fingers hovered near the lock button despite already being secured. "You're following me," I blurted, the words trembling out. He chuckled softly. "I told you that highway was rough," he replied as though that explained everything. "Just making sure you got where you said you were going. I didn't ask for an escort." His smile flickered, only slightly. People forget how dangerous it gets out here. I like to keep my routes predictable. A strange emphasis colored the last word. Cold understanding crept in, slow and heavy. He wasn't improvising. He wasn't lost. He knew exactly where I had planned to go, and he was verifying it. "You need to leave," I said quietly. His gaze sharpened again. "Soon," he replied. "Just confirming." Before I could question it, a sudden sharp series of sirens tore through the night, blue and red flooding the lot. A patrol car barreled in and locked its lights squarely onto him. He stiffened. Within seconds, officers surrounded him, weapons drawn, commanding him to step away and lie flat. Confusion flashed briefly across his face before hardening into something grim and resigned. I couldn't move. I watched through the windshield as they restrained him, searched his vehicle, pulled cables and electronics from the trunk. One officer approached me afterward, voice low and reassuring. "You did the right thing stopping here," he said. "We've been monitoring him for weeks." "What did he do?" I asked, barely breathing. "Routine surveillance tracker," the officer continued carefully. He singled out late-night solo drivers, followed them, documented patterns. Then he'd escalate. My stomach clenched. Escalate how? Harassment at first. Then home entries. We caught him before he got to the next phase. The phrase hung in the air like damp fog. They took his devices as evidence. On one tablet, I later saw a map of my usual route, centralized with timestamps, fueling stops, and notes on compliance probability. My name, written in neat digital font, sat at the top like a project title. By the time I finally made it home, guided safely by the lingering hum of adrenaline and streetlights, the night felt bruised. I shut the door behind me, locked it twice, and leaned my forehead against the cool metal, letting the silence steady my breath. He never followed again. His car never reappeared. But every time I stopped for gas after midnight, every time a stranger smiled a second too long, the memory of those unwavering headlights still pressed faintly against my spine, a shadow of something methodical and dangerously patient now definitively ended, and no longer hunting me. I had spent the evening assembling flat-pack furniture in my sister's spare room, the kind of slow, repetitive task that made time feel diluted. When I finally left, close to midnight, my hands were sore and my shirt clung faintly with the smell of sawdust and warm plastic. The drive back was supposed to be the easy part, a quiet stretch of road bordered by undeveloped fields and unfinished neighborhoods, a place where the radio faded out and the only sound that stayed consistent was my tires whispering over asphalt. I'd made that route dozens of times, always at reasonable hours. That night felt different only because of how still it was. No other cars. No porch lights. Just a narrow ribbon of road threading through darkness so thick it seemed to swallow the edges of my headlights. I lowered the window a fraction, letting cooler air brush against my face, trying to shake the drowsiness that crept in after a long day. I had settled into the steady rhythm of driving when a pair of headlights slipped into view on my left, approaching from behind and drifting carefully alongside. The car matched my speed seamlessly. An older sedan, silver or maybe just reflecting the pale wash of my own lights. The driver leaned slightly toward his open window, expression strained, eyes wide. He raised one hand and waved urgently. At first I assumed a casual warning, maybe a blown tire, a loose bumper. I gestured back, confused, and eased my foot off the gas slightly while he edged closer to my window. I cracked mine down just enough to hear him over the rush of air. "Your car's got a problem," he said quickly, voice tense. "Someone's in your back seat." The words didn't register immediately. My brain snagged on the phrasing, replayed it as if a misheard lyric. "What?" I asked, half laughing, expecting a punchline that never came. Don't look back, he added, suddenly more quiet, the urgency now compressed and heavy. Just drive. And when you can, stop somewhere lit. Before I could respond, his car surged forward. The taillights bled red and vanished around a bend. I was left alone again, swallowed by blackness. My heartbeat stuttered. A long, icy thread of dread anchored itself low in my gut. Don't look back. I tried to reason with myself, to call it some warped prank, a stranger's bad joke, maybe a scare tactic. The back seat behind me was stubbornly unseen in the dusky interior reflection, just outlines and shadows molded into the quiet shape of empty upholstery. I didn't dare turn my head. I stared forward, vision tunneling to the faint glow of the road ahead. The idea rooted itself deeper anyway. Someone's in your back seat. A subtle sound interrupted the steady hum of driving, a slow exhale, soft but unmistakable. Not mine. My hands tightened on the wheel. I felt the blood rush in my ears. I forced myself not to swerve, not to acknowledge it. A second breath followed, closer somehow, as if whatever sat behind me leaned forward in patient silence. I remembered the stranger's tone, not theatrical, not mocking. Alarmed. Measured. I swallowed hard. Hello? My voice came up barely louder than the whine of the engine. Silence answered. The road behind me remained a void. No streetlights. No signs. No safe pull-off. Panic sparked across my spine, sharp and electrical, as I realized how truly isolated I was. Another sound, fabric shifting. The faint scrape of something brushing my headrest. I inhaled sharply and pressed the accelerator, tires biting harder into pavement. My car surged forward, but the sensation behind me didn't change. I imagined eyes in the darkness, a presence studying the back of my skull. I couldn't pretend anymore. The rational excuses collapsed under the weight of instinctual terror. I know you're there, I whispered, body rigid. The quiet stretched. Then, slowly, deliberately, a hand rested against my shoulder from behind. Cold. Real. Every nerve in me flared. I swerved instinctively but corrected before I veered off the road completely. My heart slammed against my ribs, breath clawing out of my throat. The hand didn't tighten. It just lingered, as if anchoring itself to prove existence. Drive slower, a voice murmured. Low. Not panicked. Not rushed. I'm not stopping, I muttered, my voice trembling violently. You need to get out of my car. A dry chuckle ghosted near my ear. The road suddenly curved tighter. I recognized the approach now, a small service turn by an abandoned factory that still kept faint safety lights glowing dimly amber. The first hint of visibility I'd seen in miles. Adrenaline sharpened my focus. As the dim lights crept closer, the reflection in the rearview mirror finally betrayed movement, a slouched silhouette, head tilted slightly, eyes gleaming in the half-dark, lips curled in something almost amused. The stranger lifted his chin, meeting my gaze through the glass. You weren't supposed to notice, he said, voice calm and certain. You usually don't. Fear fused into cold resolve. I slammed the brakes suddenly, the car jolting forward violently. The figure lurched but did not fall. At the same time, bright headlights flared behind me. A patrol car coasted into the dimly lit turnout, siren flicking on just long enough to cut through the night. That was the moment my intruder realized he had miscalculated. He twisted, panicked now, hands reaching for the door handle, but my locks held. The officer's spotlight blindsided the interior, bleaching the hidden man into stark reality, dirty clothing, gone eyes, a face worn by anticipation rather than shock. "Get out of the vehicle," the officer commanded sharply. The man hesitated. "Now!" He slowly complied, crouched out of my back seat, and raised his hands with deliberate slowness. The officer dragged him away while another approached my window, voice cracked with urgency and reassurance. "Are you injured?" I shook my head, unable to speak. Later, in the harsh clarity of the station, they explained he'd been hiding in parked cars along secluded streets, slipping into unsecured space where drivers didn't check before leaving. He traveled silently, sometimes for miles, waiting until he could escalate. Mine had been the first time anyone noticed before he made his move. The man who warned me was never formally identified, but the officer confirmed he'd followed from a distance after spotting suspicious movement earlier down the road. A stranger had recognized danger before I ever could. I drove home with the back seat empty and every nerve humming. When I finally shut the door behind me and clicked the lock into place, the silence felt heavy but resolved. The horror had been real. And it was over. I had gone out for fast food because I'd forgotten to eat all day, the kind of absent-minded mistake that crept up on me when work swallowed everything else. The restaurant sat at the edge of town, a glowing rectangle of fluorescent light pressed against the darkness. Inside, I ordered mechanically and waited, scrolling aimlessly through messages while the fryer hissed and the air smelled thick with salt and grease. When I finally carried the warm bag back to my car, the night felt colder by comparison, a damp chill settling into my jacket as I pulled onto the road. The first intersection was ordinary. Red light. Quiet street. I drummed my fingers on the steering wheel and breathed in the faint comfort of hot fries. That was when a car rolled up beside me in the left lane, dark blue, fairly new, windows tinted just enough to conceal detail. I didn't think much of it until I glanced over and saw the driver's face illuminated by his phone. He wasn't just texting. He was holding the phone upright, angled toward me, as though he were reading something important. His eyes flicked from the screen to my car, then back again, lips pressed thin in mild concentration. Curiosity prickled, but the light changed and I drove on. At the next intersection, 2 blocks later, the same car eased up beside me again. Same lane, same distance, same slow glide as though choreographed. I glanced sideways instinctively. The driver looked over this time, just for a heartbeat, before dropping his eyes to the phone again. I frowned. The idea of coincidence still felt reasonable, but it twitched uneasily in the back of my mind. The third intersection was where it turned. I slowed to a halt and exhaled, trying to shake the sensation that something was wrong. The car slid beside me once more, tires whispering across the asphalt. When I looked over this time, the driver wasn't pretending casual anymore. He angled the phone so I could see the screen clearly. My license plate. In detail. A crisp image, zoomed in, numbers and letters unmistakably mine. Beneath it was a string of text registration information, make, model, color. I felt my stomach pitch as he scrolled further down and my name appeared. He met my eyes then. Not with anger. Not hostility. Just a calm, deliberate smile. The light turned green. He didn't speed ahead or fall behind. He kept pace with the calm patience of someone who knew the route better than I ever could. When I accelerated, he accelerated. When I slowed, he hovered easily beside me, that same measured distance maintained. I told myself there had to be a rational explanation. Tow truck dispatcher? Repo agent? Some kind of mix-up? But every excuse dissolved the longer he stayed there, phone still raised, occasionally sending screenshots or tapping something with his thumb. I took a wrong turn on purpose, darting down a residential street that curved away from the main road. Houses slept heavily behind dark windows. The car followed without hesitation. My breathing tightened. I wondered how long he'd been tracking me, whether he'd been beside me at the restaurant too, unseen in shadows. A ripple of unease slid cold across my back. I slowed suddenly and motioned for him to pass. He matched my speed, smile unchanged. Another intersection loomed. Red light again. We stopped. I stared straight ahead, afraid that acknowledging him again would somehow confirm whatever game he'd started. From the edge of my vision, I saw his arm lift, the phone angled once more toward me. But this time, the screen didn't show my plate. It showed a list of times and locations. Fast food restaurant, 9:47 p.m. Intersection A, 9:52 p.m. Intersection B, 9:54 p.m. Below that was a blinking cursor and a message being typed. Confirming pattern. My pulse hammered so hard I could feel it in my jaw. He tapped one final time and turned his head slightly, eyes resting on me with a look that made my skin prickle. Drive normally, he mouthed, voice inaudible through glass. I'm just making sure you stay predictable. Cold rolled through me, sharp and sobering. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It was deliberate. The light shifted green and I moved instantly, swerving into a narrow side street instead of continuing straight. He turned flawlessly behind me. My hands trembled as I grabbed my phone and called emergency services, voice strained as I explained the situation, fighting to keep direction and distance clear. The operator's calm tone offered thin reassurance, instructing me to stay in well-lit areas and not to stop. The car behind me drifted closer, headlights spilling hard white across my trunk. He flashed them once, then twice, almost polite. I know you're calling, he mouthed when I dared glance. He tilted the phone toward me again, revealing live text this time. Stay calm. Authorities complicate data. Rage, fear, confusion tangled hot in my chest. I sped toward the nearest police station, wheels crunching too loudly over the uneven road. The buildings shifted from dark residential to stark municipal lighting. As I pulled into the lot, my lights washing over the concrete, he cruised smoothly beside me as if invited. Two officers stepped out at once, hands resting cautiously near their belts. He didn't resist. Didn't even look surprised. As they approached, he finally lowered the phone and stepped from the car with the same quiet smile he'd maintained all night. Routine observation, he told them pleasantly. Private contract work. They confiscated his devices immediately. From my driver's seat, watching with a fragile pulse, I glimpsed the interface, my photograph, my vehicle, highlighted routes, timestamps stretching back over days. There were headings I couldn't even fully process. Behavioral trajectory. Risk compliance. Opportunity index. He had been studying me, mapping me, reducing my existence to predictable motion. The officers took him away, tension thickening the air until silence returned. Later, a detective explained gently that he had been part of an illegal tracking operation targeting solo drivers to build dossiers for unknown buyers, stalking, mapping, and selling personal routes to anyone willing to pay. They'd been trying to catch his pattern for weeks. I'd simply been unlucky enough to fit the criteria. That night ended with paperwork, statements, and the strange numb clarity of survival. When I finally sat alone in my parked car afterward, the engine ticking softly as it cooled, I stared at the empty lane beside me. No headlights. No smile. No phone holding my name like a quiet possession. The drive home felt longer than usual, but when I turned the key and rolled forward, the darkness no longer carried that watchful presence. He never smiled at another green light again. And I made it home, whole, unharmed. The drive started the way every forgettable errand did, with me regretting I hadn't done it earlier. I'd left my friend's apartment too late and got caught in a vein of slow-moving traffic that wrapped around the edge of the city like a tired snake. The air outside smelled faintly metallic, damp from a light mist that never quite turned into rain. My dashboard clock glowed 11:43 p.m., soft and needle-thin against the dark. I sat there inching forward, letting the engine idle and the radio murmur low, watching the red pulse of brake lights ripple ahead of me. People crept along, resigned, windows fogged out with their own breath. I told myself to relax, that this was just another night of small annoyances before home. That was when the tapping started. A sharp, knuckled rap against my driver's side window. I startled and turned. A man stood beside my car, wearing a neon reflective vest and a dark cap pulled low over his brow. The vest glowed harshly in the glare of headlights, catching the orange and white in jagged patterns. He looked official. Busy. Controlled. I rolled my window down just a few inches. "Yes?" I asked. He leaned closer, lowering his voice as if the night itself might overhear. "There's been an accident further ahead," he said calmly. "Lane blockage. We're redirecting certain vehicles to a safer route. You'll need to follow me." My gaze flicked toward the traffic before me. Cars crawled on, some peeling past him without hesitation, others braking as they saw him gesture. But none of them were being stopped. None of them were being pulled aside. "Everyone?" I asked, trying to keep my tone even. He shook his head. "Just a few. You included." Unease tightened in my chest like a drawn wire. "Why just me?" He smiled faintly. "Classification protocol. Just follow me. I'll guide you around the blockage." Behind him, a dark SUV idled at an odd angle, hazard lights blinking lazily. He gestured toward it, already stepping back as if my compliance was expected. I watched as the car in front of me rolled on, then another, and another, all allowed to continue straight under a dim green that never flickered to red. Every vehicle but mine moved ahead without hindrance. A cold realization slid into place. He knocked again, more firmly this time. "We can't hold traffic. You need to move." My instincts buzzed loud and insistent. The highway signs above us still read clear. No flashing warnings. No cones. No emergency vehicles. "Which agency are you with?" I asked. He looked briefly annoyed. "Road Safety Division." "Didn't I say?" "This is standard." He hadn't. My engine hummed too loudly in my ears. I glanced past him again. The line ahead loosened and uncoiled, traffic resuming its natural flow while I remained isolated beneath the bleak glow of hanging lights. "Just follow me," he repeated, voice crisp, that calm practice mask tightening subtly around the edges. I forced the car into drive and obeyed, easing out of the line as his SUV pulled forward. The moment I moved, the man slipped back into the passenger seat and the vehicle lurched into motion with sudden precision. He didn't merge us back into traffic. He steered sideways down a narrow service road marked by chipped paint and sagging signage. All the other cars continued straight. The city lights thinned quickly. The road narrowed. Street lamps grew sporadic, then disappeared entirely. My headlights cut into a bleaker corridor of overgrown weeds and fractured pavement. I pressed my eyes forward, swallowing the creeping dread. "This isn't right," I whispered to myself. The SUV's hazards blinked in dull orange rhythm, pulling me deeper into shadow. No signage. No reflective barriers. Just a stretch of forgotten asphalt and silence. I glanced at my phone. No signal. The final thread snapped. I slowed suddenly, tapping my brake. The SUV ahead halted in perfect sync. My pulse hammered as the tension became something sharp enough to taste. The man stepped out again and approached my window, his silhouette warped now, shadow-fleshed, stripped of official illusion. "You're not supposed to question the route," he said coolly. "It delays processing." "What processing?" I demanded. His lips twitched. "We were trying to avoid the aggressive approach. Guess we'll adjust." The back doors of the SUV swung open. Another figure stepped out. Then another. They moved strangely, too coordinated, like rehearsed choreography. My peripheral vision swam with instinctual fear. I didn't wait. I slammed my foot onto the accelerator, the engine roaring in defiance as my tires shrieked over gravel. The man reached for the door, but momentum yanked me forward, the side of his jacket brushing dangerously close as my car surged past. Shouts snapped through the night behind me. The SUV lunged forward, headlights blazing now, no longer pretending caution. It barreled after me with hungry intent, its engine whine tearing the silence apart. I swerved erratically through the service road, scanning desperately for any sign of light, any return to civilization. The world narrowed to the trembling circle of my headlights and the monstrous glare pursuing me. Then, like mercy spilling through steel, a junction opened ahead, a narrow bridge connecting back to the main highway. Beyond it, the familiar shimmer of city glow waited. I slammed the wheel and shot across it. The SUV tried to follow, skidding wildly, scraping hard against the guardrail. Metal screamed. I glimpsed the moment its front tire tore loose and it clattered sideways into darkness. Sirens howled faintly in the distance. Red and blue bled into the edges of night like a rescue painted across canvas. I didn't stop until I reached the first gas station under full fluorescent glare, legs shaking as I stumbled out of my car, heart racing with violent clarity. Police arrived minutes later. They took my statement while floodlights illuminated the twisted stretch where the SUV had crashed. No markings were found. No legitimate credentials. Just cheap vests, unregistered plates, and rope in the trunk. The officer's face tightened grimly when he spoke quietly to me. "This isn't isolated. They target single drivers at night. Redirect. Isolate. Take." "But why me?" I asked weakly. He exhaled slowly. "Wrong time. Wrong place. You noticed when most don't." When I finally drove home, escorted and shaken but intact, I kept replaying the moment when every car ahead had been allowed to continue while I was singled out, quietly selected from the ordinary hum of traffic. The horror wasn't that I'd obeyed at first. It was that the road had so easily pretended to protect me. And that night ended knowing with absolute certainty that if I hadn't chosen instinct over compliance, I would never have made it back. The drive started out painfully ordinary, the kind of quiet trip that almost lulled me into autopilot. I just left my cousin's place after helping her move a stack of mismatched furniture, my arms still aching faintly as I steered onto the familiar highway. The night air seeped gently through the cracked window, cool and faintly earthy, carrying the scent of wet pavement and distant fields. My headlights carved two pale lanes through the dark, and the glow of the dashboard clock read 10:58 p.m. I let the GPS guide me home without much thought, following its calm, neutral voice as it counted down exits. I'd driven this route 100 times, so when the screen suddenly blinked and announced, recalculating, faster route found, I barely questioned it. The map shifted, directing me toward a turnoff I didn't recognize. I assumed there'd been a closure or accident ahead. It happened often enough. The road narrowed almost immediately, the kind of two-lane stretch that felt forgotten by time. No streetlights. No reflective signs. Just overgrown brush pressing close on either side and the occasional animal startled by my headlights. The GPS signal flickered, the blue line curving deeper into unfamiliar territory. A low unease stirred, but I brushed it aside. Technology glitched. Roads changed. There were reasonable explanations for everything. Halfway down the stretch, something ahead caught my attention. A car sat parked crookedly along the shoulder, angled slightly toward the road, engine running. I could see the faint wisp of exhaust drifting into the darkness, but its lights were completely off. No hazards. No interior glow. Just a black silhouette idling in absolute stillness. My grip tightened on the steering wheel. I slowed instinctively as I passed it, glancing sideways. The windows were tinted too dark to see inside, but the faint vibration of the car told me someone was there. Waiting. I forced myself to keep moving. The moment I passed, my phone screen dimmed, then flashed, and no signal. And then the headlights behind me snapped on. Bright. Sudden. Blinding. The parked car lunged out onto the road, engine snarling sharply as it tucked in close behind my bumper. I exhaled shakily, heart beginning its frantic sprint. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe the driver had just been resting. Maybe I'd startled them. There was no reason to assume danger. Except they didn't pull out to pass. They stayed close. Too close. I sped up slightly. They matched it. I slowed. They did too. My mirrors vibrated with their presence, twin beams burning hot against the rear window. The road ahead remained empty, an endless ribbon of darkness offering no turnouts, no escapes. The GPS tried to reroute again, but the screen hummed frozen, still insisting this was the way home. My chest tightened as another realization crept in. This wasn't random. I hadn't simply passed a stranded motorist. They'd been waiting. I swallowed hard and tapped the brakes gently, attempting to encourage them to overtake me. Instead, their headlights flared even brighter, the car edging closer as if testing how far my nerves would stretch. Then it happened. Their high beams cut off, replaced by a slow, deliberate flicker of lights once, twice, 3 times. Not a warning. Not a greeting. A signal. This is not happening, I breathed, gripping the wheel tighter. I tugged at my phone again. Still no signal. Not even emergency call access. The car drifted slightly to the left, almost parallel with me for a brief moment before sliding back behind. A silhouette passed briefly through my peripheral vision, a driver leaning forward, head tilted, as though trying to see me clearly. A wave of dread crept through my spine. I turned the wheel sharply, taking a random side road that branched abruptly off into deeper shadow. The tires crunched over loose gravel as my headlights bobbed violently. For a breath of a second, the car behind made no move. Then their engine screamed louder, and they followed. Panic bloomed wide and hot in my chest now, no longer avoidable. I fought between reason and instinct, between the absurd hope that this was a coincidence and the reality of a deliberate, closing threat. The road tightened further, winding through a stretch of unmarked forest. Every tree felt closer. The darkness pressed thick. I spotted a narrow access road ahead, barely visible, leading toward what looked like distant light, maybe a warehouse zone or maintenance area. I veered toward it without hesitation, desperation overriding caution. The car behind swerved violently to stay with me. My breathing went shallow. I braced, palms slippery against the wheel as I tore down the path. The distant glow sharpened into fluorescent light. A gated compound came into view, and beyond it, something glorious and alive, security lighting. I slammed on the horn and accelerated, tires skidding slightly as I burst through the open entrance. The space erupted into view: shipping yards, cameras, parked trucks. The pursuing car hesitated. They rolled up just short of the threshold, headlights washing over the chain gate, then cut their engine. For a long, terrible second, they sat frozen as if measuring whether to continue. I pulled hard to a stop near the guard booth, breath ragged, heart detonating in my rib cage. A uniformed security officer stepped out briskly, motioning to me with confusion and concern. Behind us, the car reversed slowly, deliberately, retreating into the night without ever revealing its driver. When I explained what had happened, the guard's expression darkened. He radioed someone immediately. Within minutes, another vehicle arrived, followed by flashing lights in the distance. Later, after my statement shook free and broke in pieces, the police confirmed what I'd feared, that Stretch had been targeted recently by coordinated hijackers using signal spoofers to manipulate GPS systems. They rerouted unsuspecting drivers onto isolated roads and waited. They'd chosen me at random. Except I'd outrun their plan. The reroute. The silence. The waiting engine. All precision. All deliberate. That night ended with paperwork, trembling hands, and the distant echo of headlights burned into my vision. And when I finally made it home, I sat for a long time in my quiet driveway, listening to the soft tick of cooling metal, knowing with unmistakable clarity that the narrow road had almost swallowed me and that I had survived something carefully designed to erase me. The GPS never glitched again, and I never ignored that first whisper of unease. I'd only gone out because the apartment felt too quiet after my roommate left for a work trip. No music coming from her room, no kettle whistling in the kitchen, just the hum of the refrigerator and my own thoughts echoing too loud. So I told myself I needed air, that I'd take the long loop around the outskirts of town and clear my head. It was a dull, practical excuse, the kind that pretended restlessness was something reasonable. The night was unusually cool, the kind that sharpened every sound. Asphalt stretched ahead in a dark, unblinking line, and my headlights skimmed over cracked pavement and the pale shimmer of occasional road signs. I drove with the windows up, the faint smell of dust and old upholstery surrounding me, the engine settling into a soft, steady rhythm. I noticed the car behind me after a few miles. Just a vague presence at first, 2 white stars hovering in my mirror. It didn't bother me. Someone else out late, same as me. Then the distance closed. The headlights grew harsher, flooding the cabin with pale glare, and the car edged uncomfortably close to my bumper. I tapped the brakes slightly, a polite warning. They surged even closer. My jaw tightened. I sped up a little, hoping they'd pass. Instead, they matched the change immediately, staying glued to my taillights. The night swallowed everything beyond the narrow tunnel of my headlights, and the pressure from behind started to feel deliberate, pointed. A horn blared sharp and sudden. I flinched, heart thudding once, then again. The sound echoed across empty fields, ugly and impatient. The car flashed its high beams, drowning my rear view in angry white. Seriously? I muttered, trying to rationalize it. Maybe they were in a hurry. Maybe I'd unknowingly cut them off. I moved a few inches right, offering space. They didn't take it. Another blast of the horn. Another violent flare of lights. The tension crawled under my skin, itchy and insistent. I drove faster, then slower, testing for courtesy that never came. They mirrored every move, riding so close I could no longer see their license plate. This went on for miles. My shoulders knotted. My breathing turned shallow without me realizing. I stopped convincing myself this was just road rage. The way they stayed fixed, unwavering, felt planned. I spotted a shopping complex ahead, bright and awake even at this hour. Rows of fluorescent lights painted the parking lot in sterile clarity. Safety. Witnesses. I exhaled with thin relief and signaled, turning sharply into the lot. The headlights followed. They didn't hesitate. I pulled into the nearest open space, my car rolling to a slow, cautious stop. For half a heartbeat, I hoped they'd continue past me, that the act of pulling over had broken whatever obsession had gripped them. Instead, their car swung in front of mine and stopped diagonally, trapping me in. The engine idled. The headlights stayed on, bathing the inside of my car in blinding, clinical light. A chill settled in my stomach, heavy and cold. Two doors opened almost simultaneously. Two figures stepped out. Even through the glare, I saw their outlines clearly, a man and a woman, moving with steady intent, not rushed, not uncertain. Their silhouettes grew against the stretch of asphalt as they approached, footsteps echoing harder than the dull hum of distant traffic. I locked my doors out of instinct, though they were already locked. My hands trembled around the steering wheel as I watched them split, one moving toward my driver's side, the other circling closer to the passenger door. The man raised a hand, palm outward, feigning normalcy. Speaking, though I couldn't hear the words yet. The woman's face carried no friendliness. No confusion. Only expectation. My pulse hammered so hard it blurred my vision. I weighed my options: stay, confront, plead, or rely on the instinct flooding my veins. The man leaned down, knocking once on my window, light but firm. "Roll it down," he called, smile sharp and artificial. "We just want to talk." "About what?" My voice cracked, barely steady. "You've been driving really recklessly. Nearly caused an incident back there." His tone was practiced, falsely calm. Accusatory. His eyes flicked briefly toward the woman, a silent coordination that sent a deeper chill through me. "I didn't," I said. "You were tailgating me." He chuckled faintly, the sound wrong and rehearsed. "Just roll the window down and we'll explain." The woman's hand curled around the passenger handle, tugging it at once, lightly, as if testing. Panic hardened into clarity. "No!" I slammed my hand down on the horn, the blare tearing through the empty lot. Their surprise flashed for a split second, irritation bleeding into focus. I didn't wait. I threw my car into reverse, tires squealing in protest as I forced the wheel hard left, scraping dangerously close to the corner of their bumper. My heart pounded like a frantic drum as I fought for the narrow sliver of space. They shouted now, words sharp and aggressive, but I shoved the accelerator down, engine screaming as my car jerked free of their trap and bolted toward the main road. In the mirror, they scrambled back into their vehicle, doors slamming, headlights flaring to life with renewed rage. They chased. The world narrowed to the raw glare of pursuit and the trembling blur of lit storefronts flashing past. I dialed emergency services with shaking fingers, my voice tumbling over rushed explanations as I sped toward the nearest police precinct I could remember. The operator stayed with me, steady, guiding, instructing me not to stop. I followed every word. When the police station's lights finally cut through the chaos like a lighthouse, I swerved into its lot and braked so hard my chest slammed forward. The other car rolled in behind me, but this time they hesitated. Uniformed officers poured from the building in seconds. The two figures stepped out again, their confidence gone, replaced by sharp, defensive tension. The confrontation ended quickly. Words, raised hands, restraints clicking cold and final. I watched from the safety of my lot car as the reality settled in around us. Later, an officer explained with quiet gravity that the pair had been linked to a pattern of coordinated roadside intimidation, forcing drivers into isolated confrontations to extort money, valuables, sometimes more. They chose quiet roads in compliant fear. They hadn't expected resistance where light and eyes could see. By the time I finally drove home with an escort, the adrenaline had drained into quiet exhaustion. I sat in my parking spot for a long stretch, listening to the engine cool, replaying the moment their headlights had trapped me in that sterile glow. The night ended not with silence, but with certainty. They had meant harm. They had been stopped. And I had made it out alive.